In the second sally of Part 1, Don Quixote stumbles upon a group of prisoners, lashed together on a chain gang and destined for the galleys and a life of hard labour. Quixote befriends them as they tell him stories of their innocence, and when a guard attempts to punish one of them for speaking out of line, Don steps in and asks for their release. The guard obviously says no and calls him an idiot. Quixote attacks him, starting a riot that frees the prisoners. In this moment, he is the master of destiny. He is a tributary of God's will. He will seek to bring these men to his idol Dulcinea as a measure of his worthiness. With these men by his side, he can do no wrong. The poaching raid of 1909 had been masterminded by North's new secretary, Andy Curran. He'd done a magnificent job, but at the end of 1909, an opportunity arose that Curran leapt at. Jack Worrell was a groundbreaking figure who was essentially not only the first coach in football, but basically invented the position, leading Carlton from punching bags to dual premiership success in 6 years. However, his steadfast belief in the amateur spirit as player payments began to take hold, as well as a generally gruff demeanour, saw a powerful faction call for his removal, which they achieved at the end of 1909. Worrell loyalists exited alongside him, and Curran pounced. Fred Jinks was originally a Footscray boy before Carlton picked him up. A versatile player, as at home in the wing as he was at half-forward, he became a key part of Jack Worrell's Blues empire and made the grand final in all of his first 4 seasons at Princes Park. However, the sacking of Worrell left Jinks disillusioned with the club, and when North Melbourne came knocking for 1910, the now 3-time premiership player was happy to return to the VFA. Joining him was Charlie Hammond, a defender who developed into a star rover who'd had nearly 100 games of experience in that Carlton squad, massive for the time. Frank Kane, Carlton's 2-time leading goal kicker, also came along, bringing a record of nearly 2 goals per game from his VFL tenure. The final addition was another Johnson, known as Malley, who was appointed as captain to replace the outgoing Paddy Noonan, who actually left for good this time. He'd actually been a Richmond man the year his side forfeited the grand final against North, and was such a dominant rover that in 1919, Tom Leahy of North Adelaide would name him as one of his best opponents. Worrell's 4, as they were known, made an instant impact in 1910. North went from 5 wins to 15 in a season, increasing their elo by almost 200. Kane shattered the previous league goal-scoring record, scoring a whopping 70 goals, 16 more than the second-place Jack Hutchinson. Brunswick, however, didn't care and defeated North in the semi-final. They then did North a massive solid, wiping out a mighty Essendon team, no, not that one, in the preliminary final. North had been forced to use their right of rematch as a minor premier before, only to lose. They were determined that it wouldn't happen a second time.
North got to play at home. Arden Street bursting to, well, over capacity with 28,000 people showing up. A mark North would only be 11 times from 1925 onward. Brunswick kicked with a strong northerly wind in the first term and made the most of it, with a young ruck Sid Barker scoring the first goal for North Melbourne, the only goal in that first quarter, running all the way from the centre to finish the play he started as Brunswick, well, they piled on 4. Worrell's 4 featured prominently, mainly in defence, but Kane would really turn it on in the second. Now with the wind, North kept Brunswick scoreless, also scoring 4 goals with the Breezes' assistance, Kane scoring 3 of those, gaining a 9-point lead. The third term was full of missed chances from both sides, with Brunswick scoring a miserably wasteful 1-goal 5. Barker then provided an assist to Kane, registering North's only goal for the term, with several behinds of their own maintaining a lead of just over a goal. Right at the start of the final term, Jay McCann collided with Brunswick's captain, knocking them both out of the game in any real sense, which was a huge boon for North. As VFA sides had been cut down to 16 recently, space was so much easier to find, even more so with 2 players injured. Elliott capitalised, scoring a goal and a behind, with Kane knocking through his 5th goal of the day soon after. McCann bravely fought up forward, chipping in a couple of behinds, with Brunswick only managing a behind after that. One A. Trelaw, no not that one, scored North's 9th goal of the day with the last kick of the match, giving the Northerners their 3rd premiership, and the 2nd one they actually had to work for.
1911 would see the first loss of Worrell's 4, with Fred Jinks moving to captain-coach Port Melbourne. He was no great loss, however, as local youngster George Rawle made his debut and was immediately impressive. The main highlight of the year was North getting pinged for having too many players on the field against Preston. North had scored 7 goals in about a quarter and a half, but due to the rules, their score was completely reset. However, this being Preston, it was all too easy for North to overcome the sudden 13-point deficit, going on to win by 21. North registered 14 wins, only good enough for 3rd, and Brunswick got their revenge in the semi-final in North's own backyard. This time, North had no right of reply, having finished 2nd, and that was it. No, really, it was. Charlie Hammond had joined the struggling Northcote who had just merged with Preston, while Frank Kane, whose goal-kicking record had just been broken by the mighty Big Dave McNamara, left for Essendon. Not McNamara's Essendon, but the very Essendon whose proximity denied North a chance of playing VFL footy. The final member of Worrell's 4, Mally Johnson, chose to become the first and indeed last captain-coach of the infamous Melbourne City side who had played 2 VFA seasons, failing to win a single game. Extraordinary. We cut back to the start of the episode. Don Quixote standing in front of the newly released prisoners, ready to take them to his lady love. Well, turns out the prisoners had lied to him, of course, and just want to go to Egypt to get their proverbials wet. Don, incensed at their lack of chivalry, calls the biggest, baddest one a son of a bitch. And, of course, the prisoners pelt him with stones, steal his stuff, and kick him out on his ass. Just like our dear Don Quixote, North had freed mighty warriors who now just wanted to bugger off and do their own thing, leaving North with nothing but a red ass. So it was pretty much accepted that North would crash down to earth for 1912. Well, they won 15 games, only losing the minor premiership on percentage, which thanks to a high-scoring Footscray wasn't particularly close. Could have really used Frank Kane right about now. The superb leadership of Sid Barker in his first year as captain guided the Northerners to a semi-final matchup against... them again. North kicked with the wind first, with Wilson and Barker scoring to put North a quick 2 goals up. Brunswick then replied with 2 of their own, North only leading by a point. Similarly, in the second, both sides scored 3 times, with Brunswick outscoring North by a single behind, tying the scores at 26 at the half. But not before North's winger Johnson, again not Mally, in a ferocious defensive press, slipped and hurt his ankle, ruling himself out for the season, and indeed the game, reducing North to 15 men, as there was no interchange at the time. He attempted to play on, but the pain was sadly too much. In the third, despite being a man down, North made the most of the wind at their backs. Barker was involved in everything, and North ended the term 16 points up. It only took 5 minutes for the margin to be reduced to 10 once Brunswick got to kick with the breeze, North being on the back foot for the whole final stanza. 2 minutes later, after a couple of behinds, Brunswick's Warburton reduced the gap to 2. From there, it seesawed, North getting very few opportunities, as with a man down it was almost impossible to get a score on the board, especially against the wind. North valiantly defended, led by their halfback in Hopkins, only allowing 1 behind each from Mackenzie and Chase, and the scores were tied as the final bell rang. This hadn't happened to either of Victorian footy's senior levels before, a draw in a final. This meant that the match would be replayed in 2 weeks, as the next semi-final was already scheduled for the following Saturday. Finals weren't played simultaneously in Victoria for another 50 years. However, there was no small controversy, in a fact that has since been overlooked even by North's official historian in Dowling. Henry Chase, who'd scored the final point of the game, had been suspended by the Goulburn Valley Footballing Association, which by all regular readings of the rules would render him ineligible to play for Brunswick that day. Precedent had been set, as loyal GAZ-man fans may remember, with St Kilda's Bill Goddard, who played in a 1909 win against Geelong, which was overturned as a result of a suspension obtained in another league, thus handing the Saints the wooden spoon. Chase had been suspended and indeed fined by the courts for using obscene language, which must have meant that Brian Taylor would have been eligible for the death penalty if he played in 1912. Chase pleaded that he'd been goaded by the spectators and that he was unaware of the suspension. The VFA sided in his favour, ensuring though that he would be banned for most of the 1913 season.
Footscray fell convincingly to Essendon, and then it was time for the rematch, again to be held at Arden Street. The weather couldn't have been more different to the original game. It was a dour, wet affair, only drawing about half of the 20,000 strong crowd that had witnessed the draw. Tiny little Charlie Hardy scored the first point and goal, with Brunswick replying with a point that could have been a goal, but it bounced off Mackenzie's thigh as he tried to poke it through on the goal line, also missing a sitter soon after. A defensive miscue from Brunswick allowed D. Hawkins, no not that one, to pounce and score North's second, and it began to look like North were running away with it. However, they sprayed a bunch of chances, so when Mackenzie finally converted at the other end, North only ended the term up 17-8. Rawle quickly scored a Judd-esque goal through traffic to give some breathing room for North, and was involved in the next one, Roach finishing the chance, but Brunswick scored late to stay in at the half-time gap, being 14. Despite further defensive self-harm from the visitors, North failed to convert in the third. Brunswick were even more wasteful up front, however, despite scoring 2 quick goals to gain the lead. Hardy scored his second despite being smaller than literal Oz kickers, but Mackenzie gave the Wicks the 2-point lead right at the end of the term. North kicked 2 points to level the score within only 3 minutes, but they went down a man again after a Brunswickian knocked out Hawkins, who himself hadn't been playing like a saint. Elliott gave North a 7-point advantage, but this was cancelled out by a Chandler goal, his second, up the other end. With only 3 minutes left, the scores were levelled, and then, as if by serendipity, Mackenzie took a mark 60 yards out, right as the bell sounded. The man who'd missed a chance which would have won the game from about a yard out could now right that wrong and cement his legacy with a long-range punt, but he missed everything. The impossible had happened. For the first and only time in senior football history, as far as I can tell, the same two teams had drawn consecutive finals. A second replay was needed. Let's do this all again, shall we? In a close contest, North finally got over the line against Brunswick. Third time was the charm, but it had come at a very literal cost. North generated an average of just over £200 of gate receipts, which was fantastic. However, finals takings were split across all 10 clubs, meaning North and Brunswick only received about £9 total. The estimated cost to field a team and host the game for North was £25 for a finals match. That meant over these 3 games, North had made a not insubstantial loss of around £15, with Brunswick faring only slightly better since they didn't have to host. But supporters of the club, well, they were heartened by the whole thing, which had captured the sporting world's attention, at least in Melbourne. They presented the 16 men who'd won that third game with special medallions. North had finally beaten their hated new rivals, but now they had to face the best player in the country, a man who could not be stopped. That's right, he's back. The one and only Big Dave McNamara.
Melbourne City, under former Northerner Malik Johnson, had scored 762 points in the 1912 season. Assuming an accuracy of 50%, which is fair for the time, they would have scored only 13 points more than Big Dave McNamara. A former Saint, committee feuds forced him out, and permit feuds confined him to the VFA. Fresh from breaking Frank Kane's record the year before with 81 goals, Big Dave went into hyperdrive. Of the 26 goal hauls across the league in 1912, Big Dave had 9. He scored 7 against Northcote, 12 against Prahran, and a whopping 18 goals, 16 in a complete demolition of Melbourne City, on his way to kicking, at this point, 99 goals. He was mighty, and it would take a miracle for North to stop him. A huge crowd wrecking £343 at the gate to see McNamara's attempt to be the first person in history to get 100 goals in a league football season. But it was Sid Barker who drew first blood with help from the win. Big Dave had a couple of early looks for no score, allowing Hardy to assist Williamson with goal number 2 at North's end. North were double-teaming Dave, which allowed the handy Clark to pounce from Dreadnought's first, well, cool fucking name that is, Lengthy Mac, more like Big Mac, am I right? Oh no, that would have been a much better nickname than Big Dave. Oh well, anyway, that's an opportunity wasted. Big Dave clunked him up and rounded out the turn by getting goal number 100 at last. History made, with Hardy sneaking in a goal of his own late before the bell to give North a 10-point lead. Now, you may be wondering why I'm filming this outside the Farm Hotel. Well, this is the reason why Big Dave wasn't playing for St Kilda anymore. Dave owned this hotel, or at least a hotel in this general area as far as I can tell, on the corner of Charles and High Street. He was right around the corner from his old club, St Kilda, who he'd been forced out from in 1909. He wanted to get back, but he couldn't. The VFL wouldn't allow him to get in, the VFA wouldn't allow him to leave. So, for the moment, he was stuck thrashing teams like Melbourne City and, well, North Melbourne.
They'd done well in holding McNamara to 2, even though Clark had been let off the leash as a result. But the thing about superstars is that if you hold them to nothing for 90% of the game, that leaves 10% left. That's 10 minutes. A guy like McNamara can do a lot in 10 minutes. He takes a mark and scores his third. Then, yet again, Clark finds a bunch more space than he really needs and scored his 6th of the day and 44th for the year, which, yeah, doesn't sound like a lot compared to Big Dave's 102, but that's only 5 less than North's top scorer in Elliott, who didn't have a Big Dave to contend with. 8 points in it, 6 minutes left. The ball comes in again. Mick Madden gets it to Clark, who this time has drawn the defence to allow McNamara space, who of course makes no mistake, cutting the gap to 2.
Then, with about 100 seconds left, North's last goal scorer in Charlie Grierson is pressured in defence. He attempts to pass to a wide open Charlie Hardy, but ends up bombing the ball out on the full. From the resulting free kick, the ball is lofted up towards, well, you can guess, Dave McNamara. He was on somewhat of an angle, but the man who could kick the ball damn near 100 yards was well within kicking range for a normal man, let alone a man with a howitzer grafted onto the end of his leg. He hammers it through, but the umpire calls him back for not kicking over the mark, which back then wasn't play on but required a retaking of the kick. Could he do it again? Or would the pressure get to... Oh, who the hell am I kidding? Of course he gets it through. Of course he converts the second attempt. Goal number 104 for the year. Gave Essendon a 4-point lead with what turned out to be the final kick of the day. They win the final. North were far from disheartened though. Charlie Hardy would say nearly 30 years later that this match thrilled him whenever he came to think of it. Essendon though, well, they go on to face minor premiers Footscray, who'd had to wait 4 weeks to challenge the winner thanks to North's drawing fetish. And McNamara and Clark, well, they both kick 3 to secure the Dreadnought's 2nd consecutive, and as it happens, final premiership. That won't be the last we hear of the Dreadnoughts, though. Not by a long shot.
North went on another recruiting wave for 1913, and again, they were competitive. They played in a third draw in 4 games against Brunswick, but the return fixture in August was marred in controversy. Barker, the captain and part of the selection committee, refused to allow Edward Gardner to play, the son of James Gardner, who was of course North's Lord and Saviour, due to the fact that Gardner could only play defence and Barker felt North's backline was strong enough without him. North lost by 22 points. The committee had an emergency meeting and this resulted in Barker, the captain and inspirational centre-half back, being suspended from play by the club for the rest of the season. He would be given such bad treatment by the fans that day that he needed a police escort to escape, and would write in the coming weeks that he, Sid Barker, did not want anything to do with the club he'd given years of loyal service to anymore. In fact, he said quite a bit more than that. Gardner would go on to play every other game for the rest of the year. Charlie Hardy was the vice-captain but refused to take the skipper's mantle. Arthur Treloar was nominated as the stand-in. With only one match to go before the finals, it was a tumultuous way to end what, after a win against Port Melbourne in that last game, was a 13.5 win season, good for second place. What's worse, North now had to face, you guessed it, Brunswick in a semi-final. This time though, despite the shake-up, North completely dominated, sweeping Brunswick aside and leaving them to face Footscray in the final. They'd beaten the Scrays during the season, and despite Footscray finishing as minor premiers, and despite George Rawle also being unavailable for the final, hopes were high. Charlie Grierson was distraught at his error that ended up costing his side a shot at the 1912 VFA title. The supporters saw him, and not the 14 behinds North scored to Essendon's 6, and not the million other things that happened that day, as the sole reason North lost. Grierson lined up for the Northerners at the start of 1913, but the ignominy became too much for him. He transferred to Footscray. And so, the man derided for costing North a flag duly kicked the first goal of the 1913 final for their opponents within a minute of the opening bell. Yeah, the defender scored within 60 seconds, which was no fluke. The Scrays moved him forward in round 14 of that year, and he'd scored in every game since, and now in this one too. Johnson missed a chance to equalise, but Hawkins made up for it soon after. Lawson then won a free kick and, by all accounts, pulled off a miracle finish to put the Scrays back up, and then contributed to a free-flowing chain of passes that put Footscray 12 points to the good. An accurate start was blemished by Banbury, opening the lead to 13, and North decided to indulge in behinds of their own. Johnson missed his second chance, though Treloar, not that one, would later finally convert. Lever then pulls off a great smother, a quick rebound, 2 North shots, both pulled up short by Footscray's defence. The game was played at a fast pace. Freeman gets another shot, Harris stops it on the line, and one J. Johnson pounces the goal on the rebound, only it didn't count, Harris having taken the ball slightly over the line according to the goal umpire. Seeing as how the arc wouldn't be invented for another century, and wouldn't be any good until presumably some time after this video is released, North had to settle for 1 point rather than 6. Hope this one doesn't end up being close. K. Johnson, the one that's been missing all of these chances, finally nails one, and unbelievably North go into the first break only 4 points down. Tough defence characterised the second term, with Grierson popping up again after a Miles foul to score his second. Footscray used pacey ball movement in one of the first recorded instances of a handball-based game strategy to score again. North drew one back from a free, but Footscray took over, only poor kicking keeping North in it. Then, Pemberton for North partook in some bad kicking of his own, sending the kick-in on behind number 3 straight to Cotton, who was of course not on his team. A bold strategy indeed, Cotton. Carpenter rounded out the term by scoring one and assisting another for North, but the half-time margin was 12. North had it all to do to wrest the momentum back, but they had the wind, and a 1910s team with the wind is like a train going downhill, completely unstoppable. Pemberton was sent to the middle to tag Clark, who'd been good for Footscray, but his opponent, Jones, had been far from disgraced. Again, the play was quick, and again, both sides squandered chances. Then Hawkins, to the complete shock of even his teammates, goaled from somewhere around Ballarat, assisting tiny little Charlie Hardy soon after, whose goal put North in front for the first time since very early in the first quarter. Hardy again popped up. I love this little guy.
Our favourite little fellow, the little man.
When he was thrown to the floor in an incident that must have looked like Shaquille O'Neal playing with a Barbie doll. Another goal, a lead of 7 points. J. Johnson dished out some toughness of his own and nearly wore a punch for his trouble until cooler heads prevailed. Footscray gained some momentum but only gained a single point. North work it away, McKay finds it and adds North's 10th, giving them a lead by my count of 11. Holmes finished some good play to reduce the gap to 5, right in the shadow of the final change.
What a game this has been, especially for a neutral. Of course, the other VFA clubs all wanted North to win, with Footscray's right to challenge. A grand final would add another £350 or so of revenue to the league. North, well, they duly obliged. They attacked the ball more ferociously in the opening minutes, but Carpenter put a mark down. He recovered for a behind, but a goal would have been very handy. No matter though, after a Mackay miss, Carpenter presented with a mark that he took this time, and his shot was a fine one. However, Harris, who assisted him, paid the price with a leg injury, probably a hammy by this report. Hawkins also wore the brunt of a contest, laying low in the forward line for a while. Ostensibly down 2 men as interchange benches weren't a thing yet, North had a tenuous 12-point lead against the wind. Footscray smelled blood. Spence issued a couple of attacks, Miles holding off one, but was just beaten on the next. Banbury, who incidentally set a record the prior year for most hit the post behinds in a game with 7, slots through his 3rd goal. 6 points the gap. Banbury again popped up, but only managed a minor score. No word if that was off the post. Hope it was. Footscray launched attack after attack after attack, with North forced to desperately clear the ball off the last line multiple times. There's 3 minutes to go. The ball spills out of bounds. 50 yards out, another Scray's attack repelled by a tired North unit. A ruck contest in North's backline. Normally, Sid Barker would be there, ready to win the duel, but he's not there. Neither is the powerful George Rawle, out with injury since round 9. The ball goes to ground, not to North's advantage. Arthur Gregory pounces, turns, and sends a prayer goalward. North had their backs against the wall, repelling every subsequent, logical, well-thought-out attack that Footscray could muster. So, of course, a random, desperate long bomb out of a ruck contest sails over every North defender, landing in the grass right behind the goalpost. Lead goal. It's the Dogs' day now. North would launch some attacks, but Gregory's goal remained the last score of the game, and it was fitting. He was part of the 1906 West Melbourne flag against the very team whose jumper he wears now. In a way, he's been part of great successes for both of these clubs. And amazingly, from such a great distance on the run, he had put it right through the middle. The bell goes, the score. Footscray 74, North Melbourne 73. For the 2nd year in a row, North's year ends with a goal conceded from the last real kick of the game.
Don Quixote is never allowed to win. Not permanently. Yeah, he scrapes a couple of victories here and there, but either only by luck or essentially by default, bestowed on him by characters who just want to be rid of him. North had fulfilled that role perfectly, even laying down for a hot minute after getting the absolute shit beat out of them, even having a sidekick achieve success only to be felled by what essentially was weaponized bureaucracy. But this match changed something. It almost became a line in the sand. Their scapegoat from the 1912 loss had been thrown out. He would end up scoring 13 points for Footscray. Footscray won by 1. The message was simple. Stick together. Acknowledge your present and past. This is the only way to change the future. 1914. Barker is still suspended and fill-in skipper Treloar moved to Broken Hill. Charlie Hardy finally saw himself worthy to take the captaincy, with Rawle appointed his deputy, leading a good win over Brunswick in their first game. However, the second against Brighton was a massacre, losing 3 players to injury plus Hardy, who broke his leg. They lost, but despite being without their skipper for 3 months, they won their next 6 games. The first of those wins, though, saw reliable backman Keith Johnson break his leg too. This was the last straw, and so Sid Barker was brought back from exile. Richard Dingo Moran, a fringe player from the dark times of the late 1900s, was brought back as well, and all of a sudden became their leading goal kicker. Also, Bert Franks was brought in, a former South Melbourne hero in the VFL. He'd become controversial when, in 1910, he was part of a crowd outside the VFL's tribunal hearing for teammate Dick Casey. Casey was controversially found guilty of striking, and when the reporting umpire left the building, Franks verbally abused him and kicked him in the shins. When the umpire tried to flee inside for safety, Franks followed him in. Initially suspended for life, his suspension was reduced to 33 games. Thanks to the Carlton bribery scandal, it wasn't even the biggest suspension levied that year. He returned in 1912 and 1913, but was 34 at the end of that season and not wanted by South anymore. Still with tremendous talent, he went to North and formed a powerful ruck and defensive combo with Barker and Rawle.
In addition, North decided to get these players to know each other better. The so-called pie nights each Thursday, as well as meetings before each game, gave the players both the chance to socialise and to discuss game tactics, significantly improving team chemistry, a revolutionary concept that would be adopted league-wide. This, combined with the return from injury of half the damn team down the stretch, led to North's third minor premiership, playing from Footscray on percentage. Don't mind that it's lower. The VFA decided to change the system this year from this to this. Minor change, but important. North Coast had one win in a percentage of 208. It's silly, confusing, but it's more scared of you than you are of it. So, just ignore it.
They faced the Dreadnoughts, but McNamara had left for St Kilda earlier in the year to be closer to the pub he ran amid a protracted permit battle which I've touched on before. So the Northerners were able to just run over the top of them, even with 4 goals to the new league-leading scorer in Clark, who just pipped Moran to that title.
The match was to be held not here, at the EMCG. This annoyed North as they'd agreed on an in-principle deal for the Department of Lands to build a new £1,000 grandstand if they could host finals on it. As it turns out, that never really happened. But, for now, North would have to play away from home against that very same Footscray team who broke their hearts last year, who opened the scoring. Hardy chipped in North's reply before Banbury converted from a tight angle to give Footscray a 5-point quarter-time lead. Barker and Franks were moved into the followers' roles in the second, and oh boy, did that work a treat. Moran scored his first of the day, giving North a 2-point lead, becoming 8 when Carpenter converted a free kick. North began to put the foot on the pedal, with Moran getting a second, this time from a place kick. Hardy got his second soon after and missed another chance, along with his new skipper Sid Barker, who assumed the captaincy on his return in round 5. Moran extended the lead with a major, and the half-time difference was 20 points. Miles knocked through 2 goals after half-time, which basically ended the game there and then. Moran ended up with 5 goals, capping off a fantastic return season, but falling short of the leading goal kicker medal by a single goal, despite attempts to feed him, with Hardy's 3 goals a justified reward for his recovery. This was widely declared to be the best team North had put together, but, of course, they'd done all this at exactly the wrong time. 1914, of course, saw the beginning of World War I, a huge imperialist pissing contest that Australia was dragged kicking and screaming into despite having absolutely nothing to do with it. As 1950 began, it was abundantly clear that the war effort would disrupt all aspects of life, including sports. The VFA would shift to a compressed 13-game season, a decision made halfway through the year, with 6 North players volunteering to go to war to further the interests of the largest empire on Earth's battle against a bunch of mates standing outside a kebab shop. This included Moran, with young Herb Miles having to step up to take the place of lead forward. Barker gained the captaincy full-time, but Hardy lost the VC role until Fred Carpenter, his replacement, got suspended.
The other clubs all had losses to the war effort too, so North had actually got off quite well. 1915 was North's finest hour, winning every single game by a margin of at least 2 goals, including the first and only VFA Grand Final to be held in the first week of August. Brunswick weren't a chance, failing to register a goal until a few minutes before 3/4 time, by which point North had scored 9 goals 9. Miles, who'd only played in 6 games all as a defender before this season, outscored Brunswick by himself, scoring in every quarter. Yeah, I could have expanded on the first Invincible season in either of Victoria's top leagues more, but it was during a world war. It carries an asterisk. Several, actually, if you have the time. However, we don't, so let's move on. North even decided to take on the VFL for a match to raise patriotic funds for the war effort. Unfortunately, the best the league could ruffle up was 1915 St Kilda, who were average at best. North faced difficulty in that the game was played to VFL rules, meaning they'd have to rustle up 2 spare players from behind the sofa cushions to meet the 18-player VFL minimum. With their reserves unavailable, they had to pick 3 players from other teams, including Essendon's Hoare, who fulfilled his name by giving his services for free. As everyone did, to be fair. The match raised nearly £300 and opened with a brass band procession down St Kilda Road to Junction Oval. North kicked with the win to start, gaining a 14-2 advantage. Even when they lost the breeze in the second term, they kept Saints at the same distance, ending up 26-point winners in a rough game that never felt close in the first match ever played between VFL and VFA clubs. However, it would be the last game North would play for 2 years, as the VFA went into recess. The association came back to life in 1918, and while the 5 other teams that decided to compete had a mix of new and returning players, North got to call on the service of Barker, Hardy, Rawle, Franks, Gardner, Hawkins and a few other key contributors to their dual premiership triumph. In addition, new faces in dual Toms, Stevens and Brown completely changed the side and complemented the hard-working midfield, Brown with his pace and versatility, and Stevens with his remarkable goal-scoring ability. If 1915 was a procession, 1918 was a walkover. Only 2 of the 10 regular season games were in any way close, a surprisingly tight encounter against a spirited Prawn, and an affair against Brunswick that was only close because North decided to kick 5 goals 29. These 2 sides got one last go in the final series. Brunswick were battered away easily as North kicked 10 goals 23 to a piddling 5-11, but this was a nail-biter compared to the final where North posted 6 goals to none at quarter time. Prawn scored 3 for the game, being outscored by 3 different North players, Tonkin and Hawkins scoring 4, with Stevens getting 9, a grand final record. 1919 brought similar success. With the war pretty much over, all 10 teams now were competing, and North gained former top scorer Herb Miles and the reliable Ralph Cornwell, in addition to a team that was already so far above everyone else. For the 3rd consecutive season, they went undefeated in home and away games. Footscray gave them 2 solid scares with a combined margin of 13 points, with only 3 other matches being decided by even 5 goals or less. Again, North would meet Brunswick in the semi-final. Brunswick made the better start, underscored when Harold Hart dislocated his shoulder in the second term, reducing North to 17 men, with the VFA having changed their rules to match the VFL. Despite remarkable performances again from Hardy and Rawle, North felt the loss of the extra man and lost by 17 points after falling away late to an inaccurate Brunswick side. This ended the longest winning streak in any state or national football league before or since at 49 games, a streak that spanned 4 seasons over 73 months. If you include charity games played during the war, such as that Saints game, it increases to 58, which includes 3 perfect seasons, the first such examples in the VFA since 1893. But the season wasn't over. Of course, being minor premiers, they had the right to challenge Footscray, who beat Brunswick in the final. However, North didn't really ever get close, going down by 22 points. The streak was over. The Invincibles were dead. North fell back down the table. Players began to become self-interested, and the committee was either unaware or uncaring, according to new North Melbourne and Victoria captain Charlie Hardy. They still finished 3rd, but looked nowhere near as strong as a 16-2 Footscray, at least until their semi-final.
The EMCG once again held host to these 2 rivals, but in front of only half the crowd of their Titanic 1913 tussle. These 10,000 fans were treated to a congested battle of packs, a game seen as being poor quality overall, not helped by the game having been postponed a week due to typical driving Melbourne rains, meaning neither side had played in 3 weeks. The first goal was such a bizarre spectacle that I can't really understand what actually happened. One of 2 first-term goals for Footscray, with North missing easy chances to trail 16-4. North continued to waste chances, Smith finally getting their first after no less than 6 misses, 5 resulting in minor scores. The congestion increased to Tokyo intersection levels, which seemed to make everyone involved kind of angry. North were desperate, and in one of the first examples of any type of flooding, all of their players were sort of in a general mass, the closest player to their defensive end a whole 40 yards out from the goal they defended. It was asking for trouble, and indeed, Footscray struck through former VFL leading goal scorer Roy Park, who hung out the back and outpaced North's straggling backman. Oh dear. Luckily, Smith came alive as the physical intensity increased, scoring 2 quick goals to amazingly give North a slim half-time lead. North's familiar 3-man ruck combo worked effectively in the third. Rawl, the physical presence, allowing Barker to direct the ball so that Hardy could get first use in the in and under. No one could touch him, he was so small. This resulted in a Jones goal and yet more single-point scores, 4 goals 11. Yep, frustrating, and rendered even more so thanks to late goals to Park and Craddock that levelled the scores at the final change. North hit the ground running though, with Ellingson having 3 scoring shots. Let's count them out. No, oh god. Not even 1 goal, no joy. But North had the momentum, that was critical, with Footscray taking 7 whole minutes to even get the ball back in their own half. Overeager though, North again pushed their defensive line way too high, and that man Banbury, who'd wrecked North so effectively in 1913, scored. A 3-point lead became 9 thanks to a smart Howe finish from a stoppage. Points to both teams preceded a goal to Considine, the margin back down to 3 with 21 minutes gone. It was gonna be a close... Oh, Parks just scored again. Fantastic. And look, there goes Craddock to seal it. And most thought he did, but he must have just missed. Tom Brown scored a reply. North was alive. The gap was knocked back to 4 minutes later. The Scrays had a shot, but missed. North rebounded it down the field and the ball was directed to an old name with a new face, Considine. Billy this time marks the ball 30 yards out just after the final bell rings. Gerard Dowling estimates that the ball was 4 feet away from him when time elapsed. However, the umpire, not hearing the bell, awarded the mark. Ironically, the Footscray fans did not seem to hear the umpire's whistles as they invaded the EMCG in triumph. Considine, well, he tried to have his shot. He was still entitled to it after all, but the crowd refused to move. Police were no help as they couldn't clear a path, not even with horses. The game, as a result, was abandoned, with a league meeting on the following Monday morning resulting in a 10-5 vote in favour of a full replay to be ordered for the week after. Keep in mind that the match had already been postponed by a week thanks to the weather. And if you put all this into perspective, plus the rivalry that had lasted the entire decade, you had a replay match that was peak at the forefront of any football conversation. Both sides were impacted by injuries from a tough prior game, with a total of 7 changes made to the teams combined. The most notable was Tom Brown. However, the game drew double the crowd of the previous encounter. North did not appear to miss Brown's dash and goal sense, being 13 points up at the start of the last term, with the wind at their backs. However, Footscray scored the next, and then a fight broke out so bad that it had to be settled by mounted police. This seemed to rattle the North men, who promptly gave up 2 goals to be 4 points down. Then it happened. 1 minute left. Billy Considine presents in the forward line. It was almost the exact same situation as the prior week. Without a crowd in his way, Billy marks. He lined up the goals and scored. North were 2 points up. It was perfect, poetic, beautiful. By all estimations, there are about 20 seconds left. It was over. The ball was bounced in the centre. The symbolic resumption, that's all it was. After Footscray had ended North's run in a similar fashion years before, after their fans had interrupted the game 7 days earlier, this was perfect. This was a poetic... Wait, hang on. I'm getting a late news flash. Footscray have got the centre clearance. Okay, this is not fantastic, but with seconds to go, it's... well, the score's unlikely here. Come on, I mean, they haven't got the 6-6-6 rule, and they've scored 9 goals in 99 minutes. A goal here is almost impossible. North will still carry... Oh, wait, hang on, I'm getting an important update here. Roy Park has secured the ball out of a pack and is having a shot on goal. Again, not great. Roy Park is by far the greatest player in university VFL history. Take that statement for what it is. But the guy managed to get a leading goal scorer medal in a team that finished last. That was the Coleman medal equivalent in a winless team. He is a test cricketer, a doctor, and only quit playing footy in 1950 because of jadedness after an unjust suspension. If you want the ball in anyone's hands as a Footscray fan, you want it in his. But it's a snapshot, which 1910s players are really bad at under heavy pressure. I'm getting word that his shot is on its way. Woodington, a faithful North backman, is in hot pursuit. It's bouncing. Woodington swipes at it. Once, a miss. Twice, a miss. The ball outpaces him and it dribbles through. It's truly too late now. The bell rings. The ball not even getting a chance to return to the centre. Footscray, once again, have stolen victory from North Melbourne. They will go on to beat Brunswick in the final, in events that are so unbelievable we couldn't script it. But now we get to the point where we really stop talking about the on-field product. North Melbourne had finished being a powerhouse. This was the game that ended it. November 1920 brought the news that the Railways Commission would be buying the land that the EMCG stood on to create more room for Melbourne's burgeoning railway network, particularly some new rail yards, which are sort of over there as I'm filming. This meant that its main tenant, Essendon, brackets not that VFL one, end brackets, would have to find a new home. And it had two main choices. The first was, of course, a ground that shared their name, the Essendon Recreation Reserve. This was the home of the Dreadnoughts at the moment, but they'd ceased being relevant in any real footballing sense when Big Dave walked out the door. It was a fair ground, not to the quality of the EMCG, but it was a fair distance from the city, particularly when compared to the ground they were being forced to vacate. In addition, it was basically in the middle of nowhere, exposed on all sides to ferocious gusts of wind that made the EMCG look like an air-conditioned tenement. Not that anyone knew what aircon was in 1921. The second was the home of their closest neighbours, Arden Street. Essendon's player base mainly lived in and around North Melbourne rather than the actual place they were named for, and the club had a strong relationship with local businesses as well as a history of player transfers with North itself. Plus, the ground was known for being one of the highest quality in Melbourne. In June 1921, they made a decision. They would seek to play in North Melbourne. This was music to the ears of North's committee and the area's councillors. They figured that if an Essendon team moved to the area, its identity would eventually be overrun by the North Melbourne name, especially with the high degree of success North had had in the VFA. So, North jumped the gun. After training, on the 30th of June 1921, the North squad were ushered into the club rooms and informed that, effective immediately, the North Melbourne Football Club would be disbanding and seeking an amalgamation with Essendon. The committee encouraged as many players as possible to stick around and join the new entity. After all, the once strong Bombers were now bottom of the VFL, but a lot saw better opportunities elsewhere. Miles went to Williamstown, Monaghan went to Hawthorn, and in the ultimate indignity, Sid Barker and Charlie Hardy, North's leaders in their glory days, went to that same Essendon League team. George Rawle, interestingly, went to the Dreadnoughts. This appeared to be the only way that North could get into the VFL, an ambition they'd of course harboured for 20 years to this point. The VFL itself agreed to and endorsed the move after North's delegates voted to pursue the merger. However, Essendon weren't convinced. One AF Showers led an investigation into how legal it was for North Melbourne to offer up the Arden Street ground for a merger, as it was still Crown land, entitling the public to its use first and foremost. Thus, the Essendon club had no legal right to monetise its use. Showers, as well as the VFA, who were desperate not to let the league get a foothold of such an important suburban ground, consulted David Oman, Minister for Lands, who sided against the use of Arden Street by Essendon. So the Essendon League Club instead opted for a hostile takeover of the Essendon Recreation Reserve, taking the Dreadnoughts, who were now dreadful, out of their home. The Essendon Council had been angling for this all year, building a new grandstand and re-fencing the ground at great cost, 12 grand to be precise. The ground, now known as Windy Hill thanks to Lou Richards, now had a new tenant, and Essendon would play here until deep into the 1990s. Today, they still use it as a playing field for their seconds and for their women's team.
North had been barred from re-entering into the association after their merger attempt, and the VFA continued with 9 teams for the rest of the year. This advantaged Williamstown, who hadn't yet played the 5-3 North side when they folded. Each remaining North fixture gave Premiership points equivalent to a win, so Williamstown got 1 more than everybody else, which sealed their finals ticket, enabling them to launch an unlikely but successful crusade for their first Premiership. However, the Dreadnought situation was so perilous that a merger with North Melbourne, which used the Arden Street ground, was seen as inevitable, and so it was. The Dreadnoughts combined with what was left of North Melbourne on the proviso that, as with the last reformation, the committee shared no personnel with the previous North setup. Again, just like the last time, North were made to swear an oath of fidelity and loyalty to the VFA and promise never to make another attempt to join the VFL. I'm sure that will last a long time. 1921 also saw the passing of James Henry Gardner. The father of North Melbourne rallied from his sickbed to give an impassioned plea to the VFL to let his club into the league, but failed. He lived long enough to see his club get reformed, but not long enough to see out his dream of watching North play VFL footy. A new player base was headed up by George Royal, who had landed back at North almost by accident. Of course, he was made the new captain coach. Journalists even predicted the new North Essendon entity to make a big splash in 1922. And the amazing thing was, they did. With only 2 members of its previous year's side carrying over, all squad lent heavily on the boot of 55-goal forward Danny Gardner, who'd been a backman in that 1920 squad, to reach the finals. And not only that, they would beat the 16-2 Grey side convincingly in their semi-final. Their good run would come to an end, though, as Port Melbourne won by 26 points in the final, going on to beat that Footscray side the next week. This was as good as it was going to get, though, as 1923 saw a downturn, North finishing 5th. It was a boring year by North standards, what with the club not being in a massive winning streak or folding entirely. 1924, however, was a different story.
I've touched on the politics of the 1924 VFL poaching before, so I'll do a bit of skimming here interspersed with some new information I've learned since. Thanks to the league's first HQ, Harrison House, which stood right behind me, not actually being built for another 5 years. I don't know where exactly all these talks happened, but we'll just roll from it, film from here. That'll be the next best thing. Now, Collingwood's delegate, Copeland, who this is named after, raised that at the next meeting, expanding the league to 10 or more clubs should be discussed. It was, but nothing came of it. Then on the 22nd of August, a letter was read out from the Brunswick Club, pleading for a seat at the cool kids' table. The VFL probably laughed and threw it on the fire, I guess, if they had one. A subcommittee was organised on the 26th of September, tasked with selecting clubs to join the league and also figuring out what to do with Carnival's Limited's offer of leasing the Motordrome ground, which itself carried the proviso of admitting public service, a likely amateur team recruited only of public servants and government officials. Oh boy, they do a bad enough job already, let alone on the football field. This was headed by Melbourne's Dr. McClelland, who this was named after. On the 17th of October, 2 proposals were read out from Camberwell and Hawthorn. At the same meeting, the VFL tabled that they would let the VFA know that their clubs had been approaching them for entrance into the league and wanted to know what the VFA's status and attitude was towards player transfers, which had been a bit of a touchy issue between the two bodies. Also raised was the possibility of a new sub-district competition, potentially a hint towards a 2-tier league system, but this was turned down. A move that was made was to try and lock down the Motordrome ground, mainly to lock the VFA out of it now that the EMCG was gone. An agreement between the league and the association was that no club was to transfer between the two, so the VFL had to find a loophole in order to try and poach one of the VFA clubs. They informed the VFA that, as the league saw it, if the VFA admitted a new club, the agreement between the two organisations was void, as it broke the current status of club numbers. North Melbourne was mentioned for the first time at this meeting. Geelong wanted the Motordrome ground as their Melbourne home base, and an extension of this plan was to secure metropolitan grounds of high quality, such as Arden Street. No action was taken, but these points remained a priority. On the 9th of January 1925, delegates of the 9 VFL clubs met, their Jeopardy thinking music having run out. The Caulfield and Hawthorn councils had submitted official documents of interest. McClellan then raised Footscray, who had just beaten Essendon in a VFL-VFA showdown, as his option, and noted that the VFA had just decided to admit a team, Coburg, which broke the agreement between the two as specified in the VFL's correspondence. Then a Mr. Hunt of the Carlton Football Club got greedy. Why only admit one club when we could admit 3 and break the VFA, really destroy them? He suggested Footscray, Hawthorn and Prawn. The meeting ran for hours, so long in fact that the meeting was adjourned, and the delegates came to Cobb's Cafe, Burke Street. This isn't it. Over fish and chips, the argument went nowhere. It took until the next morning to hammer out the specifics, by which time the Prawn Club had been replaced by North Melbourne.
How the fuck did it get there?
Well, a Melbourne newspaper had, sensing the mood in the air, run a poll asking punters which VFA club they would like to bring into the VFL. The number one choice was North. Secondly, a secret committee had been visiting each league club to spread the good word of North Melbourne. This included Paddy Noonan and a councillor. They'd even swung by the tramways board to see if their Flemington Road line might be able to swing past Arden Street, pretty please. And finally, the VFL had convinced David O'Man, Minister for Lands, to reverse his 1921 decision, allowing North Melbourne to play VFL football at the coveted Arden Street Oval, even if they didn't get their tram stop the way they wanted it. But the hard work had been done. They were finally in the VFL after 29 years of trying. But what happened to the boy who got everything he ever wanted? After all, the VFL was of a much higher perceived quality than the VFA, and North had just finished 5th in that second-class competition. Still, it had been a winning season, that is to say they had won more games than they'd lost. North knew there'd be an uphill battle. What they didn't know is that in 1924, they had played what would be their last winning season for nearly 2 decades. Thanks for watching, everyone. I'd love to give a shout out to the members on Patreon. Without you guys, I wouldn't have been able to do the filming trip in Melbourne. That wouldn't have happened without you. So thank you all so much for supporting the channel. We're going to do great things this year. So thank you to Cody Bibby, Some Geek from Twitter, Seamus O'Dowd Clancy, Nathan Krauseratus, Renegar, Temanuel Cant, Tim Wilcox, Phil Johnston, Brian Shadowbuck, Cyric, Jezza, M. Philpott, Zach Dawson is my hero, Zia, P. Robin, and our newest member, Pub with No Beer. Also thank you to Waziam, our GAZ-man follower.